They say blood is thicker than water, but I've got a different theory. Blood is just a biological accident.
Real fatherhood is forged in the AM fevers, the soul-crushing overtime shifts under a brutal Ohio sun,
and the grease under your fingernails from fixing a car for a girl who doesn't even share your last name.
At least she didn't until I fought for it. My name is Brandon.
I am 35, and for 16 years, I lived a life I didn't start, but I sure as hell intended to finish. I met Sarah when she was barely 20, a terrified single MOM with an 18-month-old toddler named Olivia. Her ex, a guy named JAX, was the definition of a Midwest klitsch. High school star turned local burnout.
When Sarah told him she was pregnant, he didn't just walk away.
He swiped the $400 she'd hidden under the mattress for the electric bill and vanished into the exhaust of his rusted-out Camaro. I fell for them both instantly. By the time Olivia was 3, I was the one teaching her how to swing a Louisville slugger in our backyard.
At 4, we stood in a wood-paneled courtroom in Dublin, Ohio, and I officially adopted her. I remember the weight of her on my hip, smelling like apple juice and crayons, as the judge signed the papers. I gave her my name Miller. I spent the next decade making sure she never knew the sting of an empty seat at a recital or a missed birthday. I was the one who pulled 60-hour weeks as a lead electrician, wearing boots with holes in the soles, just so I could funnel every spare dime into a 529 college savings plan. I wasn't her donor, I was her dad. Or so I thought. The hardest part of a slow death isn't the goodbye. It's the promises you're forced to make while the person you love is turning into a ghost right in front of your eyes. 3 years ago, my world went dark. Sarah was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. It wasn't like the movies, no soft lighting, no poetic last words. It was the sterile hum of a chemo ward, the smell of antiseptic, and the crushing weight of medical bills that insurance laughed at. In her final week, Sarah gripped my hand with a strength I didn't know she had left. Her eyes were sunken, but her voice was sharp. Brandon, she whispered, don't let her end up like me. Don't let her struggle.
Give her the exit ramp out of this town that I never had. I looked her in the eye and swore on everything I held sacred that Olivia would be okay.
I promised she'd go to a top-tier university, that she'd have a career, and that she'd never know the desperate, clawing poverty Sarah grew up with. After she passed, I doubled down.
I became a ghost myself, working every holiday, every double shift, driving a truck that rattled like a tin can full of nails. I wasn't just saving money. I was building a fortress around Olivia's future. By her 18th birthday, that 529 account hit $95,000.
It was her ticket out. It was my sacred vow kept.
But I didn't realize that while I was building a fortress, someone else was digging a tunnel underneath it. They say the devil doesn't come at you with horns and a pitchfork.
He comes as everything you've ever been curious about.
And for an 18-year-old girl who just lost her mother,
the devil looked like a long-lost hero in a leather jacket. The change in Olivia didn't happen overnight.
But looking back, the signs were screaming.
It started a month after her 18th birthday. The girl who used to tell me everything suddenly went radio silent. Her phone became a permanent extension of her hand, guarded like a state secret. She started skipping our Sunday morning pancake tradition, staying locked in her room until noon. I told myself it was just the grief gap that delayed reaction to losing Sarah, and I tried to give her space. I thought I was being a supportive father. In reality, I was just being blindsided. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. I finished a wiring job in Upper Arlington early and pulled into our driveway at 3:00 p.m. Sitting there, blocking the garage, was a beat-up, primary Chevy Camaro that sounded like a chainsaw through a megaphone. I walked into my own living room and found a stranger sitting in my recliner.
He looked like a rough draft of a human being, faded tattoos creeping up his neck, greasy hair tucked under a backwards cap, and the smell of stale cigarettes clinging to him like a second skin.
He was holding a beer from my fridge.
My heart hit the floor. I didn't need an introduction.
Even after 16 years, I recognized the smirk. It was JX. Brandon, right?
He said, not even bothered to stand up.
He looked me up and down, mocking my work boots and my dusty high-vis vest. Nice place you got here.
A bit suburban for my taste, but I guess it's a good place to hide a kid. Olivia stepped out from the kitchen, her eyes shining with a light I hadn't seen since Sarah was healthy.
Dad?
I mean Brandon, she corrected herself, and that tiny slip of the tongue felt like a serrated knife to my roots.
This is JX.
My real father. We've been talking on Instagram for months. He's finally home.
Home? I managed to choke out.
Olivia, this man hasn't been home since you were in diapers.
He doesn't even know your middle name, actually, JX interrupted, leaning back and propping his dirty boots on my coffee table. I know everything I need to know.
I know you've been keeping her in a cage, and I think it's time she finally had some freedom. Manipulation is a masterclass in rewriting history. Within a week, JX didn't just enter our lives. He set fire to every memory we had built. And Olivia was the one holding the match. It was like watching a virus take hold.
JX spent every afternoon filling Olivia's head with a twisted version of the past.
Suddenly, the story I knew, the one where Sarah was a brave survivor, was replaced by a lie where she was a cold-hearted manipulator. JX told Olivia that he never wanted to leave. He claimed Sarah had trapped him with the pregnancy and then used her boring, rich new boyfriend, me, to push him out of the state.
He painted himself as the free-spirited artist who was too real for our suburban facade. He was young and scared, Brandon.
Olivia screamed at me one night when I tried to show her the old police reports of his thefts.
He made mistakes, but at least he's not a fake.
You and MOM lied to me my whole life. You just wanted to play the hero because you couldn't find a woman who didn't come with baggage.
That one burned, but the psychological shift was worse. Olivia, the girl who had worked so hard for her 3.8 GPA, stopped caring about her AP exams. She started coming home at 2 o'clock a.m., smelling like cheap weed and desperation, her eyes glazed over.
She wasn't my daughter anymore. She was a stranger who lived in my house and treated me like a nuisance, until she needed something. I need one, 200, she said one morning, sliding into the kitchen with a cold, entitled stare.
JX's Camaro needs a new transmission.
He's got a gig lined up in Nashville, and he can't get there without it. No, I said, my voice steady despite the roar in my ears. I am not spending my hard-earned money to fix that man's car so he can take you further away from your future. Your money? She laughed, a bitter, sharp sound that made my skin crawl. It's our money. You told me MOM wanted me to have that college fund. Well, I'm an adult now. Since I'm taking a gap year to help JX with his music, I want my cut.
Just transfer $20,000 to my account. Consider it an advance on my inheritance. She didn't see a father standing in front of her. She saw a bank vault that was refusing to open.
She looked at me with pure, unadulterated greed, coached by a man who had spent his life leeching of others. I realized then that JX hadn't come back for a daughter.
He had come back for a payday. There's a specific kind of silence that happens right before a storm hits a heavy, suffocating pressure.
But the storm that broke in my hallway that Friday didn't just bring rain. It brought a wrecking ball to everything I called home. I walked through the front door and tripped over a duffel bag.
Then another. The house was dead quiet except for the sound of drawers slamming upstairs.
I found Olivia in her room, throwing her life into plastic bins and suitcases. She wasn't crying. She looked exhilarated, like she was finally escaping a prison.
What are you doing, Olivia?
I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'm done, Brandon, she said, not even looking at me. I'm moving in with JX. He's got a place out by the old industrial canal east side. It's a trailer, but it's ours. We're going to build a studio there. We're going to be free. My stomach turned. I knew that area. It was a wasteland of rusted scrap metal, meth labs, and broken dreams. It was exactly the kind of place I had spent 16 years trying to keep her away from. Olivia, please.
That place isn't a home. It's a trap. You're supposed to start at Ohio State in 6 weeks.
You have a full dorm set bought and waiting in the garage. She turned on me then, her face contorted with a cruel, entitled smirk. College is a scam for people like you, people who want to work 9 to 5 until they rot.
JX says the system just wants my money. And speaking of money, she stepped closer, her voice dropping into a demanding hiss.
I want the $95,000.
All of it.
Now, that money is in a 529 plan for your education, Olivia.
It's not a slush fund for a drifter's music career. It's my future.
She screamed, the sound echoing through the empty hallway. You told me MOM wanted me to have it.
JX has debts, Brandon. Important people he needs to pay back so we can start our label. If you ever actually loved me, you'd give me what's mine.
Or was that just another lie? Was I just a tax write-off for you? She stood there, vibrating with rage, demanding I hand over 16 years of my sweat and blood so she could hand it to the man who had abandoned her mother. She wasn't asking for help. She was demanding a ransom for a relationship she had already decided to end. Most people think anger is loud,
but the most dangerous kind of anger is the one that goes bone cold. It's the sound of a heart turning into a stone. The air in the room felt thin, like the oxygen had been sucked out by her entitlement. I looked at Olivia, really looked at her, and I didn't see the little girl I taught to ride a bike. I saw a stranger with a hollow heart. I'm not giving you that money for a trailer park pipe dream, Olivia, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady vibration. I promised your mother you'd have a future.
Giving that cash to JAX isn't a future.
It's a funeral for everything she sacrificed. That was it. The mask of the grieving daughter slipped, and the monster JX had coached came out. She stepped right into my space, her breath smelling like the cheap energy drinks she'd been living on. You're so pathetic, she spat, her voice dripping with venom.
You think you're my father because you signed some papers.
You're just a boring, controlling old man who tried to buy my love because you're too dull to earn it.
You used that money to keep me on a leash, but the leash just snapped.
JX is my real family. He has my blood. He has my soul.
I've always hated the way you look at me like I'm some project you're proud of fixing. She grabbed her last bag and headed for the door,
stopping only to throw one last jagged shard of glass over her shoulder. Keep your money.
Robert, she said, intentionally using my middle name because she knew I hated it. I'd rather starve in a trailer with a deadbeat who loves me than spend another minute being saved by a fake like you.
I hate you. I wish you'd never met my mother. The front door slammed so hard the family photos on the hallway wall rattled.
One fell a picture of us at the Grand Canyon 3 years ago.
The glass cracked right across her face. I didn't chase her. I didn't yell.
I just stood there in the silence of a house that suddenly felt way too big. Something in me had finally clicked shut.
For 16 years, I had been the safety net, the cushion, the guy who caught her before she hit the pavement. But she had just told me she wanted to fly. Okay, Olivia, I whispered to the empty room. Let's see how you handle the gravity in the state of Ohio. A 529 plan is a beautiful thing.
It's built on the assumption of a future.
But when the future you are building gets set on fire, you don't just stand there and watch the smoke. You collect the insurance and buy yourself something that actually roars when you step on the gas. Monday morning felt different. Usually, I'd be at the job site by 7 o'clock a.m. But instead, I put on my best flannel, drove to the Chase branch on High Street, and sat in a cold, glass-walled office. The banker looked at the numbers on his screen, then at me, his brow furrowing. Mr. Miller, you realize this is a dedicated education fund, he said, tapping his pen. If you withdraw this for non-qualified expenses, the IRS is going to take a massive bite.
Between the 10% federal penalty and the state income tax on the earnings, you're looking at losing a significant chunk of change. I know exactly what I'm doing, I told him.
My voice didn't shake. The qualified expense I was saving for just decided she didn't want an education. She wanted freedom. So, let's give it to her. Close it out. All of it. He didn't argue further. An hour later, I walked out of that bank with a cashier's check for roughly $74,000.
The rest had gone to the government, but for the first time in years, I didn't care about the loss. I felt lighter. I drove straight to the Dodge dealership.
I'd spent 16 years driving trucks that smelled like old coffee and sawdust. Vehicles with engines that groaned every time I hit 60. I walked onto the lot and pointed to a midnight black Ram 1500 Limited. It had the Hemi engine, the 12-inch touchscreen, heated leather seats, and a sound system that could drown out any memory. I didn't haggle. I didn't trade in my old rig. I just handed them the check. I'll take the premium warranty too, I said, sliding on my sunglasses. As the salesman went to prep the paperwork, I pulled up my phone and opened a travel app. I'd never seen the ocean, not the real one. I'd spent my vacations at work cat irons or camping in the backyard to save money.
I booked a first-class ticket to Maui and a 10-day stay at the Four Seasons.
Total cost, more than I'd spent on myself in the last decade combined. I climbed into the cab of my new truck. It smelled like new car and no more excuses. As I pulled out of the lot, the bass from the speakers thumping in my chest, I realized Olivia was right about one thing. The leash had snapped. But I wasn't the one who was going to feel the fall. Reality is a cold shower. But it's even colder when the gas company pulls the plug on your trailer in the middle of a rainy Ohio night. I was sitting on my balcony in Maui, watching the Pacific sunset when the first cracks in the free spirit fantasy started to show. It took exactly 6 days.
I was sipping a glass of 18-year-old scotch, listening to the waves, when my phone buzzed. It was an unsaved number, but I knew the area code.
I let it ring for times before I picked up. Brandon?
Olivia's voice was thin, frantic, and backed by the sound of heavy rain hitting a metal roof.
There was no Robert this time.
No controlling old man, just the shaky breath of a girl who had realized that freedom doesn't pay the utility bills. "Hello, Olivia," I said, my voice as calm as the ocean in front of me. "How's the artist's life?"
It's not what I thought," she sobbed.
"The water's been off since yesterday, and the heater's making this clicking sound."
Joey X is.
"He's stressed, Brandon. He says he owes some associates $5,000 from an old deal that went sideways, and they showed up here tonight."
They kicked the door in. He told them I have the college money. He told them we'd have it by tomorrow. I took a slow sip of my scotch. I could hear JX in the background, muffled but aggressive, swearing at someone. "That sounds dangerous, Olivia," I replied.
"But I think there's a misunderstanding. You told me you didn't want my leash. You said you wanted your real family. Well, you're standing right next to him."
JX is a man of the world, isn't he? Surely he has a plan. "Please," she wailed. "Just send 10,000, just to get them off his back and get the lights back on.
"I'll go to community college, I promise."
Just transfer it."
"I can't do that, Olivia. See, I took your advice. You called the money a bad investment used to buy your love. And you were right, it was a terrible investment.
So, I liquidated it.
I'm currently looking at the Hawaiian sunset from a first-class resort. I bought a new tracker too.
The Ram 1500 Limited. It's got ventilated seats, Olivia. It's incredibly comfortable." There was a long, dead silence on the other end, broken only by a distant crack of thunder. You spent it," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "That was my life." "No," I corrected her firmly. "That was my life."
16 years of my overtime, my sweat, and my sacrifices for a woman who loved me, and a girl who claimed she hated me. You chose blood over loyalty, Olivia. Now let's see if that blood can keep you warm tonight. Call your real dad."
"I'm going to dinner." I hung up and blocked the number. The scotch tasted better than ever. The hardest part of being a man of your word isn't keeping the promises that feel good, it's keeping the ones that hurt. I promised Sarah I'd protect Olivia's future, but I realized I couldn't do that until Olivia understood that a future isn't something you're given.
It's something you respect.
The flight back from Maui was quiet. No crying babies. No turbulence, just the hum of the engines and the cold clarity of a man who had finally drawn a line in the sand.
When I pulled my new Ram into my driveway, the first thing I noticed wasn't the manicured lawn I had paid a neighbor's kid to mow.
It was the splintered wood around my front door frame and the shattered flower pot on the porch. My Ring camera notifications told the story I had ignored while off grid. Olivia had showed up 3 days ago.
Screaming, pounding on the door until her knuckles bled, and eventually trying to kick the lock in.
JX was there too, pacing the driveway like a caged animal, probably looking for anything he could hawk for a quick buck.
The police had eventually come called by the neighbors and escorted them away in handcuffs for trespassing and attempted burglary. I didn't call the station to drop the charges. I just went inside, changed the locks to a high-tech biometric system, and sat in my silent house. A few days later, my sister, Megan, called me.
She was the only one Olivia could still reach.
"Brandon, she's in a bad way," Megan said, her voice soft.
JX kicked her out the second he realized the golden goose was cooked.
He literally threw her bags into the mud and told her not to come back without the cash.
She's couch surfing with some old high school friends who live in a 2-bedroom apartment with 6 other people. Is she safe?
I asked, my heart clenching despite the wall I'd built. "She's working," Megan replied.
"She got a job at a 24-hour diner over in Hilliard. She's pulling double shifts, 4 o'clock p.m. to 8 o'clock a.m., just to afford a bus pass and some groceries."
She looks exhausted, Bien."
She asked if she could come home. I looked at the empty hallway where her graduation photos used to hang. "She has a home, Megan."
"It's the one she chose. She told me she wanted to be an adult, and in the real world, when you spit on the person who built your house, you don't get to walk back through the front door just because it started raining."
She needs to feel the weight of those double shifts. She needs to know what $1 actually costs. I didn't unblock her. I didn't send a check.
I just went to my garage, grabbed my tools, and started working on a project I put off for years. For the first time in my life, I wasn't working for her.
I was working for me. My father used to tell me that a reputation is like a ceramic plate. You can glue it back together after you break it, but you always see the cracks. And if you smash it into 1,000 pieces on purpose,
Well, you'd better get used to eating off the floor. 2 months. That's how long the silence lasted.
it was the quietest 60 days of my life, spent in a house that felt less like a museum of grief and more like a sanctuary.
I kept busy.
I did the work. I drove my truck, and I waited for the inevitable dot. IT came on a rainy Tuesday, right around the time the night shift ends at the diners in Hilliard.
My phone buzzed on the nightstand.
It wasn't a frantic call or a demand for cash. It was a text. A long one. Dad, it started. Not Brandon. Not Robert. I'm sitting at the bus stop and I can't stop crying. My feet hurt so bad I can barely walk.
I finally saved enough for my first month's rent on a tiny studio, and I realized.
You did this every day for 16 years.
You worked until you were exhausted just so I didn't have to.
I was a monster.
I let a stranger rewrite my history. Because I wanted to be edgy and free. But all I did was destroy the only man who ever actually stood up for me.
I applied for community college for the spring.
I'm paying for it myself. 1 shift at a time. I don't want the money, Dad. I just miss my father.
Can we talk?
I read it 3 times. I looked out the window at my new truck. Then at the quiet, empty street. A part of me, the part that still remembers her in pigtails, wanted to grab my keys, drive to that bus stop, and bring her home.
But the man who promised Sarah she'd be strong stayed put. If I let her back in now, the lesson ends.
If I bail her out today, she'll never know the pride of earning that degree with her own blistered hands. She wanted to know the real world.
Well, the real world doesn't give you a reset button just because you finally said sorry. I didn't reply. Not yet.
I'm going to wait. Maybe in 6 months, maybe a year. I'll meet her for a coffee at a place where she isn't working the shift. I'll look her in the eye and see if the girl I raised has finally grown into the woman her mother wanted her to be. People think the $95,000 was the gift.
They're wrong. That money was just paper and ink.
This struggle,
The double shifts, the cold bus rides,
the realization that blood doesn't make a father, but loyalty does.
that is the real education. It's the most expensive thing I ever bought her. And for the first time, she's actually learning. The rent is due, sweetheart. And for the first time, I know you've got this. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments.